In essence, we argue that despite evidence of traditional buildings and practices, the cultural sites and buildings are retained and are being marketed as part of a tourist attraction. And since they are marketed by the tourism board as a site of location, it naturally meant that it has been reduced to its very own economic value and function. We are marketing culture for money, which is the commodification of our Singapore River culture. Our third observation is we found that there are public and private efforts in mediating the effects of the dilution of the Singapore river culture amidst globalization. We argue that the efforts of public and private sector in preserving the local culture during the process of modernization have illuminated the rich Singapore culture practices. For example, in the public effort, we found that there are insertion of local elements such as scriptures, artifacts, and local specific structures such as the Great Emporium. These structures, statues, scriptures represents the social relationship and trading behavior amongst the different ethnic groups in the past when Singapore River is still a trading port. We also recognize private efforts in mediating the effects of the dilution of Singapore River culture. For example, you can see in the Hong Kong street, the locals are still selling local traditional stuff that was sold during the past when people was still a trading hub. These distinct local street elements and the trading activities representing the historic culture of Singapore River provide a stark contrast against the modern infrastructure. This contrast makes the past rich Singapore River culture practices stand out even more to the locals and foreigners, and serves as a reminder for the rich trading culture of Singapore River in the past. In the midst of modernization and transforming Singapore River into an iconic symbol that represents Singapore progress into a global city, there have been evidence that planners have introduced many international events in the Singapore River modern landscape to draw the locals and foreigners' attention to Singapore's beautiful cityscape. And in the process of doing so, we argue that attention are also drawn to local culture practices in Singapore River. International events such as the Millionaire Duck and F1 introduces tourists to the cultural landscape of the Singapore River. And since these events stand out in the modern landscape, we believe that the cultural elements will remain etched in the tourist's mind. In addition, the international events held in this contrasting landscape served as a magnet to pull locals and foreigners to this waterfront and provide the opportunity to witness and or remember and or understand the past rich culture practice of Singapore River. As a result, we feel that modernization have the effect of illuminating and promoting the culture of Singapore River. This effect is further enhanced by the river merchant art at Boat Quay. These sculptures represent the yesterday life of Singapore and give us a glimpse into the cultural heritage that make up Singapore today. Sculptures of children playing along the river shows the carefree and easy life of the older days of Singapore. Merchants of different ethnicity chatting highlights the multiracial mix of Singapore from the past to the present. Labourers loading bags of goods shows the back-breaking work that our ancestors were subjected to in an attempt to make Singapore a modern city hub. The sculptures also reflect the type of financial borrowing of the olden days, where there were no banking facilities yet. The traders manually recorded all the transactions in their record books. These examples shows the transition of Singapore from the past to today, but comparing it against the modern landscape. At the same time, it also preserves a fragment of our past. However, we argue that despite the public and private efforts, we feel that the culture have been relegated and overshadowed to the greater modernity landscape. As such, it shows that the modernity takes precedence over culture, and that culture in such a modern tourist landscape is used as a hallmark to attract tourists for the economic value and function. Our conclusion is that even though there are culture artifacts along the Singapore River, they are ultimately being commodified and marketed as a form of tourist attraction, as an iconic status for greater economic value and function. Thank you.